Hello, KINES 5 students, and welcome to week 5 of Sport and Society. I hope that you guys enjoyed learning about the great Jack Johnson and gained some perspective on some of the challenges that he endured throughout his career and some of the breakthrough things that he was able to do at a time when it was just unbelievably tough to do for people of color. And to not I don't want to do him any injustice, but I wanted to show a short video on the Zoom today, just in case you guys did not see this in your research of him. To me, this is a little 9-minute video, and then I'm going to have some comments afterwards, and then we'll get into this week's information. But this week we're going to be kind of jumping forward to the 1930s to the 1940s, and we'll get into that lecture after we watch the video and talk a little bit more about Jack Johnson. So I'm going to share my screen here, and we'll play this link, and I'll also include this link in the email that I'll be sending out to you guys. So in case some reason it malfunctions on the Zoom for today, you'll have the link in your homework assignments. So at this time, well, I'll let the video tell the story. And so hopefully you'll enjoy this.
This is the last surviving film frame of a famous boxing match in 1908, a World Heavyweight Championship, fought in Sydney, Australia between American boxer Jack Johnson and defending champion Canadian boxer Tommy Burns. Johnson won. The fight wasn't even close, and the film displayed signature traits of Johnson's: his habit of taunting his opponents and flashing his famous golden smile while he fought. The reel ends moments before police stepped into the ring and put a stop to it, preventing Johnson from knocking Burns out. This is the night Jack Johnson became the first black heavyweight champion of the world, in front of 20,000 mostly white spectators and, more importantly, motion picture cameras. Copies of the fight film spread throughout Australia within days, replaying Johnson's effortless victory over and over at screening events attended by paying crowds. Pretty soon, that film was seen worldwide. And from the moment Jack Johnson's reign as World Heavyweight Champion began, a target was on his back. Commercial motion pictures and professional boxing both came to prominence around the turn of the 20th century. Boxing's format, short rounds fought in a stationary ring, lent itself well to early film, with its clunky cameras and relatively short film reels. Film companies would travel around the country projecting reels of prize fights in packed theaters and opera houses. Champions were celebrated as heroes, and that's because boxing, going back centuries, has been wrapped up in themes of identity and pride.
Boxers symbolize their communities, not just their national communities, but also their race.
Teresa Runstetler teaches history at American University and specializes in the intersection of race and sport.
They imagine that boxers in the ring, particularly for interracial fights, that they were almost engaged in this kind of Darwinian struggle, fights between white men and black men. They became a kind of metaphor for race relations. So in other words, if a white man won, it would reinforce ideas of white supremacy. But if a black man won, then it would upend ideas of white supremacy.
As professional boxing, or prize fighting, became more popular around the turn of the century, fights pitting black boxers against white boxers were organized at all levels, except for the highest honor in the sport, the heavyweight championship.
There had been a kind of unwritten rule that white heavyweight fighters were not to fight black fighters in title fights.
This de facto line of segregation was called the color line.
And so Jack Johnson, being the best black fighter at the time, struggled to find white opponents.
Johnson, who by 1908 had already defended his separate title of World Colored Heavyweight Champion 17 times, was repeatedly denied a shot at the most prestigious title in the world, until defending champion Tommy Burns accepted his challenge in 1908. And you already know how that turned out.
Burns's defeat at the hands of a Black American fighter disrupted that narrative of white supremacy.
You can see this happening in how newspapers framed the fight. Reporting on Johnson was heavily skewed to appeal to white readers, and overwhelmingly drew attention to his race, sometimes before using his name.
Jack Johnson holding on to the heavyweight crown was just not acceptable in an era of white imperialism, Jim Crow, and global white supremacy.
The search for a white heavyweight to take the title back from Johnson began the night he won it. Former heavyweights claimed they would come out of retirement to fight him, and that a white man must hold the title. The most popular choice among promoters and white boxing fans was James Jeffries, a former heavyweight champion who had retired undefeated in 1905 and was named the only hope of the white race. Johnson, for his part, was ready to defend his title against anyone, the retired Jeffries included. Jeffries was out of shape and hadn't stepped into the ring in over 4 years.
They had him believing that if he just trained a little bit and got back in shape, that he could win and get the heavyweight crown back for the white race.
The pressure and the promise of big money worked. Johnson and Jeffries signed a deal, setting a date for the following year. White press coverage leading up to the fight depicted racist cartoons of an overconfident Johnson and predicted his downfall at the hands of Jeffries. This fight, hyped as the battle of the century, was to be a contest of racial supremacy. And, of course, it would all be on camera. The fight was set for July 4th, 1910 in Reno, Nevada, and a massive stadium was constructed, outfitted with 9 motion picture cameras positioned around the ring to document and then commercially distribute the event. On July 4th, Independence Day, over 20,000 spectators crowded inside.
They imagined that this would be the ultimate way to celebrate, to watch Jim Jeffries, their great white hope, beat the crap out of, this uppity, unruly African American who didn't know his place.
Crowds gathered outside in cities all across the U.S., too, and packed into theaters separated by race because of segregation laws in the U.S., to listen to instantaneous telegram updates of every round, waiting to find out if Jack Johnson, who 9 months earlier knocked out challenger Stanley Ketchel so hard he fell down himself from the momentum, would lose his heavyweight title to Jim Jeffries. But, of course, that didn't happen.
Dude, stop trying to play
Sorry, we
guitar
got a
solos
commercial
on
break
scales.
here.
And no, this isn't hype. This isn't a joke.
In the 15th round, Johnson knocked Jeffries down for the first time in Jeffries' career, waited for him to get up, and when he tried, sent him through the ropes. Jeffries' corner helped him to his feet, which technically should have ended the fight, and let the former champ get punched in the face and thrown to the mat one more time before stepping in to call it. Johnson was once again the undisputed heavyweight champion of the world, and the nation erupted. Violence broke out in American cities, where anxious crowds had been awaiting the news of the fight.
And they call them race riots, but essentially it was white mob violence against African Americans. It became this kind of attempt to put African Americans back in their place.
At least 19 people died the night of July 4th in the violence following the fight, with hundreds more injured. Fear of further unrest led to an immediate attempt to ban the much-hyped Johnson-Jeffries fight film. Black press outlets pointed out the hypocrisy of this ban, like the Afro-American Ledger, which printed, "It was a race question from the start to the finish, for which the Negro was not and is not responsible. The results, riots, deaths, and injuries lie at the door of the white man and his prejudices." The professional world noted that a real fight was advertised and a real fight was had. What more or less could have been expected? Police were instructed to break up screening events.
White authorities were worried about the symbolic implications of the Jack Johnson victory being replayed, they worried that any demonstration of Black victory and any demonstration of white weakness or defeat would undercut the narratives of white supremacy, not just in the United States, but in colonies like South Africa, also India, the Philippines.
But the hype that surrounded the fight meant there was no way to completely suppress it.
So it became this kind of Pandora's box, and they tried to shut it. But anytime you make something illegal, you just push it underground. So they criminalized it, but they couldn't ultimately get rid of it.
Congress banned the distribution of all prize fight films in 1912, citing the race feeling stirred up by the exhibition of the Jeffries Johnson moving pictures. But by that point, the film was notorious worldwide. It was the most talked about motion picture of its time, and screenings drew crowds for years following the event. Jack Johnson lost the heavyweight title in 1950 after successfully defending it 8 times. His legacy of crossing the color line and becoming the first Black heavyweight champion inspired generations after him. This is a picture of one of his greatest fans in 1968, outside of a theater producing a play called The Great White Hope, which was loosely based on Johnson's life. A legendary heavyweight champion who named Johnson as a major inspiration, Muhammad Ali.
Okay, pretty heavy duty. When you think of what was going on, just the amount of courage and guts that it took for somebody of color to accomplish what Jack Johnson did. I mean, it was everybody against him. And it's embarrassing to look back at those times in history when those types of things were happening, and unfortunately some of them are still happening today. And it's you know, I've probably brought this up in every lecture, that it's just unfortunate how history repeats itself over and over, and we're still battling some of the same issues that seem like, to me, they seem like no-brainer issues, and it seems like we're still dealing with them, you know, almost, well, over 100 years later. He was an awesome champion, and you know what he did for the world, and what he did in the United States. It really, you know, when you talk about perspective and people gaining perspective, and you know, back in those days, there were many people in our country that, if they were African American, there were many people that had never been around white people, and vice versa. And so to have a African American champion at that time, it was awesome, and it was needed, and it was kind of the beginning of more things to come. And so Jack Johnson was, as I said, it was a great champion and a great human being. And, you know, he made it possible for other kids to feel like they could do what he did, and they could gain access to this lifestyle that he had, and to the influence that he had. You know, and when you see that, when you see the opportunity there, and you see somebody that has walked in your shoes and has accomplished the things you've accomplished, or what somebody has accomplished, that's inspiring, to see that it's possible, to know that it's possible, no matter what the odds, just to know that it's possible. I think is just so huge in the mental part of that. And so as we move forward in our timeline of the class, you're going to notice 2 pretty major themes that come up in this class, and the first one being race and sport, and the second one being gender and sport. And those 2, I think, are the biggest social issues that sport has had impacts on over the years. There's been many other areas, and we'll talk about some of them. Some of them are serious, and some of them are even kind of funny. But these 2 issues, to me, are the basis of this class, really. I think when somebody first wrote this class and decided that this was a viable topic to discuss and research and talk about, I believe they had these two themes in mind. And so as we start moving forward in the early 1900s, race was just, a major issue. It was a turbulent time. And as we saw in the video with Jack Johnson, there was all these things happening in our country with civil rights and struggle, and across the world it was happening. And a character at this time that started to arise was a person named Adolf Hitler. And Adolf Hitler, for those of you that don't know who he was, you should know who he was. He's a pretty infamous, diabolical character from history, and just did some unbelievably horrific things and tried to do things. So Adolf Hitler, he was actually Austrian-born German, and he was a politician, and eventually became the dictator of Germany from 1933 until he died in 1945. But he rose to power as the leader of the Nazi Party, and became the chancellor in 1933, and then assumed the role, other roles, and kind of just worked his way up through the power. Worked his way up to power, and he's known as one of the most powerful and notorious dictators of the 20th century. And what Adolf Hitler capitalized on, was he was trying to take advantage of a whole race of people and try to conquer other nations. And he took advantage of economic woes by other countries and other groups of people. The popular discontent that he just kind of fueled things, and the political infighting, to take absolute power in Germany beginning in 1933. And he was able to do that. And eventually Germany's invasion of Poland in 1939 led to the outbreak of World War II, and the Nazi forces had occupied much of Europe. Hitler's anti-Semitism and obsessive pursuit of Aryan supremacy fueled the murder of approximately 6 million Jewish people, along with other victims of the Holocaust. So this guy was a terrible guy. He was trying to wipe out a whole race of people, and was doing it in just, he was not a good person, and he was all about white supremacy. And so people like Jack Johnson, that was like a 4-letter word probably in his household, and he probably couldn't believe that an African-American person could be the boxing world champion. And he was probably sure that there was some German that they had at that time that was that could have beaten him. And that was just kind of the mindset. It was white supremacy all the way. And in 1936, what was happening is, so you have this person, Adolf Hitler, that's coming up through the ranks, and he's taking over, and he's just creating havoc and doing atrocious things. And ironically, the Olympics are scheduled to be in Berlin in 1936. And so you can see this train wreck coming. You have these racial issues that are happening around the world. You have this most diabolical character of the century running rampant. And then you have the Olympics in his country at the height of his power. And so there was a lot going on in this era. And many of the countries around the world were going to boycott the Olympics. So it sounds familiar to what's going on right now, doesn't it? So there was going to be boycotts. And I think as I can't speak for the countries, but what ended up happening is that more countries than ever before participated in these Olympics. And I think it was a real show by athletes around the world and governments around the world that it was a time for a change. And so you can see how the stage is set now. You have this ruler that's got the stadium filled with his people that you know, it's all about white supremacy, and he's got his armies marching through and his soldiers marching through, and you could imagine what that would feel like for a person of color coming into that stadium to compete in the Olympics, and what kind of courage that it must have taken to, because at the same time he's killing all these people in his country for not being white, and you got to go into this hostile environment and go compete at the highest level under the greatest amounts of pressure, and so there was this was a pretty important Olympics in regards to the Olympic Games, and I hope you guys will enjoy this week's assignment, because it really crosses over, and it brings up our next person that we're going to talk about in this class, and who was just an amazing individual. And so you could imagine, try to imagine, okay, that you are an athlete of color in the United States, and the highest place you could go in track and field at that time was to be an Olympic champion. There wasn't professional track and field. There was no way to make money, just purely running track. But the pinnacle of track and field was to go to the Olympics and represent your country and be a champion. And so you have this time where people are not being treated in the United States. People of color are just being faced with hurdle after hurdle after hurdle for the bare minimums, and for just opportunities to live a life. And so you have athletes that are training to go represent that country that doesn't really represent them, and doesn't really back them. And so you can, again, try to imagine how you would motivate yourself every single day to train and to sacrifice. You know, it really takes an unbelievable individual, in my opinion, that somebody that sees a bigger picture, somebody that has a vision, and then somebody that's able to take that vision and that athleticism and that gift they were given of being a tremendous athlete, and putting them together to just make a, you know, I think, you know, Jesse Owens is like a superhero, and so that is the person we're going to study this week. So Jesse Owens was a track and field athlete, and I'm not going to say much about him because I want you guys to enjoy learning about him from better sources than myself. But he was an up-and-coming track star, and it was the 1936 Olympics, and he was in a very, you know, the United States was not treating African-American people well at all. The world was not treating African-American people well at all, and definitely Adolf Hitler was not treating anybody other than white people with any kind of respect, dignity, or humanitarianism. And so it's pretty much, you've got to be feeling like everything is against you, and there's so much pressure on you. Again, it's hard for me to imagine. I've been involved in sports my whole life, and I've played in big games, and I've played in games where there was pressure, but the pressure was to win or lose a game, or maybe a conference championship or something like that. But when you have the pressure, and you have a whole race of people basically on, you know, that you may feel like you're carrying that burden for all of them. To me, it's just amazing, truly amazing, and one of the greatest stories in all of history and in all of sports. It's just so awesome that they tie together. It's just perfect for this class. And so we're going to be looking at Jesse Owens this week, and who he was. We already told you what sport he plays, but talk about some of the societal issues that he impacted, and some of the obvious ones, and maybe some of the not so obvious ones, and some of the sacrifices he had to make, how his contributions have impacted where we are today and how it affected his personal life. And I hope you guys will study him long enough to learn about him after the Olympics, because to me that is a really important part of the story. You know, many times we hear of a story where somebody overcomes great adversity and they get to the pinnacle of their sport or whatever their challenges in life, and then the story kind of ends, you know, with the Hollywood ending. You know, they win the championship and everybody's happy. This is not one of those stories, unfortunately, and so I think it's important that you know, make sure you do the whole assignment and get and learn about Jesse Owens even after the Berlin Olympics and what he was able to accomplish there. So I've also included some links for you guys this week in our homework assignment. They're all really short, but I think they're just great. A name you're going to hear if this subject appeals to you, you really should know who Dr. Harry Edwards is. And Dr. Harry Edwards, many would say, is the kind of originator of this subject and is the all expert on this subject. And he's been a teacher for many years. He's been an advisor many years. He's a leader. He's a great man in many regards. And so there's a couple of short links about Dr. Harry Edwards. And one of my favorite links that I'm sending out to you guys, there's two really good ones. One is about the first football game between USC and the University of Alabama. And another one is about the University of San Francisco. And it's about a football team back in the 50s that was fully integrated, which was kind of rare at that time. The West Coast was way ahead of its time. And actually both of these links, the USC Alabama and the University of San Francisco links, deal with the same subject. You had the West Coast that was fully integrated and the South was not. In the South, there were white college football teams and there were black college football teams, and they didn't play each other. And there weren't white guys on the black college football teams, and there were not black guys on the white college football teams. And amazingly enough, it wasn't until the early 70s that the University of Alabama had one black football player on their team. And I think it was shortly before that there was only one black football player in the whole SEC conference. And when you look at that conference today and you look at Alabama's team picture today, it seems crazy. But these two stories deal with that issue, and they're really good stories because they talk about some people that, you know, just to me did some great things. And I think you'll enjoy all the links today or this week for this week's assignment. But again, just get back into Jesse Owens, do the whole assignment, learn about this great individual. And I look forward to reading your perspectives on Jesse Owens and working our way through this class. So again, if any of you have questions or you need extra time on assignments, just communicate with me. I'll work with you on it and we'll get you dialed in. Last thing I will mention today is that next spring of 2023, Santa Rosa Junior College has an opportunity for kinesiology students to take classes in Florence, Italy. And I'm going to be teaching the kinesiology classes in Florence, Italy. And so I'll get more information to you guys regarding that at some point in the semester, but just wanted to get it on your radar. And if that's something you think you might want to do, it's going to be pretty awesome. We're going to get to go to Rome and see all of Italy and take field trips and be there for 12 weeks. So anyway, more to come on that. I hope you enjoyed this week's lesson and I hope you have a great weekend. And that is it for now. So bye-bye, everybody.